College football nerds here talking Alabama, Tennessee, third Saturday in October. It has not always been that. Sometimes it's second recently. I think they got back on track, but 2024 and on, it may not be. So enjoy it while you can. I got Nerd Josh here with me. We're going to get nerdy in this game. We're also going to remind y'all, one, like and subscribe helps us out a ton. We've got all the views coming in every week, but not as many people are subscribing as much. So if you want to get that notification and you're going to get this wonderful content week in and week out, you got to hit subscribe. Helps us out a ton. Also share this where you talk football. Helps us out a lot. Quick plug for collegefootballnerds.com. Our model that we're going to share with you here in a minute for this game is available for you for free, to do any two games you want to simulate, any two teams, and it'll spit out a score and prediction for you. NFLU, you can track Tennessee, Alabama football players in the NFL with one click. Don't go chasing box scores. We got other statistics like rankings, box scores, things like that, schedules, and a top 25 that you can contribute to. It's open to anybody that has a free account. All right, Josh, enough of that. Let's talk Alabama and Tennessee. Both teams coming off a decent but maybe deflating win this weekend, and it probably was a little bit of a look ahead to this game. I think we'll probably see a little bit sharper team on both sides of the ball. But I think it's interesting last year versus this year. Last year, neither one of these teams played good defensive football, and in this game played really good offensive football. And this year it's kind of reverse. I don't know that Alabama fans, I think everybody knows Alabama's got a great defense this year, maybe best in the country. I don't know that they realize that Tennessee is actually playing really good defensive football. Yes, they've taken a step back, maybe quarterback, wide receiver, overall offense is taking a step back, but that defense is playing legit this year.
Yeah, they are. And in absolute metrics, like, yard per pass attempt, they're 12th in the country, yard per rush attempt, 39th. Top 30 in most statistics, 26th in points allowed. Where it's a little screwy is we generate these relative performance statistics. So those look at who you've played, where their strengths are, and it's basically comparing your performance against your schedule compared to how everybody else played against your hybrid composite schedule. And just saying, are you better or worse than other teams had been against the same competition? And in that regard, it ends up making Tennessee strangely lopsided. They're 5th in the country in our relative performance against the pass. They're 110th against the rush per carry. And that really, really speaks to the fact that they have played some teams that throw the ball quite well, like Miami. And they've played some teams that also don't run the ball very well, and so just to be 39th actually is sort of unimpressive in its own way. So I think that's kind of fascinating, right? That it has been a fairly high pressure defense, but it's been a defense that the front has taken a step back, but the secondary has improved tremendously from last year. Really, really weird example. And then of course on the flip side, on Alabama's side, everybody knows that they're top, but they're top 20 in every defensive unit. 3rd against the pass themselves, but also 15th against the run. And that really, I think, drives a lot of the matchups in this game from last year where you had a 40-plus point outing on both sides. Now you have a situation where these are two really highly ranked defenses and two offenses that are very obviously trying to struggle to find rhythm.
Yeah, Alabama's got the best defense in the country. I've been saying it since week 2. They're so much more improved from last year just in overall fundamentals and tackling. But if you look at our relative performance numbers, we just gave Ohio State a lot of praise because in 4 of the 6 categories we tracked, they were top 10. But then they had one that was 45th and one that was top 20. Alabama is top 20 in everything, but 4 out of those 6, they're top 10.
Well, they're top 5.
Actually,
4 of the
top
6 too.
5.
Yeah.
4 out of 6, they're top 5. And this is with an offense that's constantly giving the ball back to the other team in terms of not so much turnovers lately this year, but in terms of 3 and outs, negative plays, sacks. So it's not only are they giving the ball back after 3 and outs, but they're taking 2 sacks in 3 plays and giving them short fields. And the defense is still 5th in the country in relative points per game allowed, in spite of having to be on the field a lot, in spite of facing short fields. And a lot of it has to do with something maybe Tennessee fans may not realize because it hasn't been there the last few years. That Alabama defensive front creates a ton of pressure, maybe not as many sacks, but a ton of pressure, one of the best in the country.
Yeah, well, and I would say they do. I mean, they do create sacks. I think Dallas Turner, at least as of last Saturday, was leading the country in sacks. And then Braswell doesn't get nearly enough credit. He's been consistently in the top 10. I think the difference, though, is that defensive line for Alabama is a different beast. The defining aspect of the Alabama-Tennessee game last year, in my mind, was that Alabama could not stop the inside run game.
He's got to stop that little inside trap.
Tennessee, when they spread 4 or 5 wide sets, and they either, mostly 4 wide sets, but sometimes they ran it with Hooker, they could run inside pretty successfully for Alabama, and they could get on the linebackers, and Alabama could not really play too high safety because every time they tried, Tennessee would just run it snap after snap at minimum 6 yards a carry. And it's because once Alabama lost Ebba Wigby, their defensive end, to injury, that front, and they had a couple guys banged up, that front just wasn't very good. Now the guy that had played nose as a freshman is moved out to defensive end where he's more comfortable. They've got another guy playing high-level football, defensive tackle. They get Ebba Wigby back at the other DN slot. They're basically better at every single position at the defensive line, and they're deeper than they were last year. Combine that with the fact that, they lose Will Anderson, but Braswell himself was a top three overall recruit or something like that, 5-star player. Dallas Turner's probably the best pure pass rusher, and he came back. The front is ferocious, and the linebacker play has been better, been more physical, and that causes everything else in that defense to just look so much better because they're not having to compensate for that defensive line. And I think that makes, last year Alabama couldn't really generate pressure due to Hooker's mobility, due to the fact that they couldn't stop the run. This year it's a different beast. Alabama's probably going to be able to push the pocket. They're probably going to be able to stop the run, which means you're going to face more 3rd and longs against a team that's going to be willing to rush the passer. Everything points to this to being a defensive slugfest. And that does turn to the other major point of conversation, I think, for both fan bases. And that's, does either one have a quarterback that's going to consistently complete a forward pass, right?
Thing is, Alabama's like a 9-point favorite, which if you watch Alabama play Arkansas Saturday, especially in the second half, you would say, I'm not sure they can score 9 points on a good defense. And some of it, I think, is because of how Milton played in that game and how he's played this year. He can hit a hot streak, and he is similar. I texted you during the Tennessee game. I think Alabama and Tennessee have the same quarterback. Milton runs it a little more in terms of like design runs than Milroe does. And Milroe connects a little more on the deep ball, though I think that his deep ball is throwing to more open wide receivers. So they're scheming receivers open a little bit better. I actually think Alabama has better wide receivers this year than Tennessee. But you're right. Like that, to me, it's a little interesting, and this is where I want you to maybe pick it apart a little bit. I think both of these teams are going to struggle mightily offensively in this game. One, because they have some deficiencies on offense, but two, because they're facing really good defenses. So from that standpoint, I'm surprised that there's such a big number in Alabama's favor because in my mind, I haven't looked at the over-under yet, but I'm guessing that Vegas doesn't think that these two teams are going to score a lot of points Saturday, so they may not think Tennessee's going to break 10.
Yeah, and I'll give you your homework while I'm talking here that I think I'd love to hear what the over-under is because we're recording this on Sunday while the lines have been slow this year. They're actually coming out late, and so they weren't out when we started this recording session. The interesting thing to me offensively in our relative performance, Tennessee's 75th passing and 6th rushing. Again, when you look at who they played.
48, Josh.
48.
Interrupt you right there.
48. That's actually almost exactly what I had the score in my mind to be, so that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, all right, 48th. Yeah, Tennessee's 75th passing, 6th rushing in relative performance. Alabama is more balanced. They're 31st and 36th. And if you watch that Texas A&M game, what you saw was a Tennessee team that ran the ball pretty well. I think ran for like 200 yards in the first half. And then when they got clamped down or anytime they got a stop, they just couldn't convert. Alabama is more likely to be balanced on both sides, running and passing, as an offense, and Tennessee's not. And I think the reason why this is -9 is that one stat we flagged, right? Tennessee's run defense is particularly bad, 110th in our metrics. And the thing that was quietly true to me in that Alabama-Arkansas game is Alabama actually started to run the ball pretty darn well. In the box score, Jace McClellan ran for 5.2 yards per carry. Rodale Williams ran for 9.7 yards per carry. The backups ran for 10 yards per carry and 5.5 yards per carry. People blame that Alabama offensive line for a lot of their woes. First, I think they ignore the fact that they ran rather successfully in Arkansas, and they really just didn't lean on it enough to put the game away. But two, the harsh reality is that Jalen Milroe as a quarterback is putting them in bad situations. He's not dropping to the right depth. I know at least when I was watching, one sack was him being too deep. A couple sacks are either not sliding his protection right. I know the majority of the sacks in the A&M game were protection and scheme issues, usually either on the coaching staff or more often the quarterback to audible protection or call on, meaning you got a guy that you can't block. The offensive lines, you've got to bring somebody in to help because the numbers are overloaded, and he doesn't do a great job of identifying that. They're now calling that from the sideline. That's been the adjustment since midway through the Texas A&M game, which has shored a lot of that up. But there's still issues. Like one play, like a rollout pass where they show a corner blitz. He's got to see that, and he's got to know he's got to get rid of the ball, and he ate a sack on that play. That's totally on the quarterback. But if they can run the ball successfully, right? If Tennessee actually is the kind of run defense that the stats are kind of flagging here, and bear in mind they've played a lot of teams like A&M that really don't run the ball well this year on a consistent basis, then Alabama may be in a situation where Jalen Milroe can just be the deep bomb guy. You say that they're the same quarterback. It's like they're the same guy with one slider turned up and one slider turned down. Jalen Milroe can lob up the deep ball, but when he's got to drive it, his mechanics are poor. He tends to overthrow short and intermediate passes and isn't very consistent. Ironically, Milton is actually pretty good in the short and intermediate stuff. He's got a cannon, and he's pretty good at driving that ball. The problem is he throws everything flat. So when he throws deep, he can throw 80 yards, but he puts no air under it. It's just driving on a line, and it makes it really hard to get that ball to come down where it needs to come down on the receiver. Too often it's just sailing over his head through the back of the end zone, or it's sailing short. And that's actually really dangerous because you want to be dropping the ball in on deep balls. You don't want to be sort of doing it scattershot because it's really easy if you aim low, you're going to hit a safety and throw interceptions. So that's, to me, I think that's why the line is what it is. There's an indication here that Alabama's run game is starting to get figured out. Tennessee has been somewhat susceptible to the run. The Florida game in particular was egregious. That's probably why the stats are what they are. And if this does turn into a game like the Florida game, there is the potential here for Alabama to bully Tennessee in a way that I think a lot of people aren't expecting. But it is just a potential. There's a reason it's -9, not -30. There's a lot of other things that can go right for Tennessee. And I think the first thing there is, what version of Joe Milton are you going to get? Because he's going to throw deep shots, and whether or not he connects on them is probably going to be the difference in something like 14 to 20 points in the ballgame for Tennessee's offense.
And I'll also add that, like, this Tennessee team ran the ball well last year. Jalen Wright's a good running back. Like, Joe Milton can run the ball well, effectively, and keep his offense on the field at times. I'm concerned that they only got one touchdown in the second half against Texas A&M. It was kind of an ugly game in general, and that was off of a punt return. So I think that what Vegas is probably seeing is they feel like both these defenses are probably legit, but Alabama's defense is really elite, and Tennessee is just not going to be able to consistently move the ball. It might be a situation where, like the Arkansas game, Alabama's offense stalls and it creates some openings on a couple of, lucky plays or whatever, short fields that gives Tennessee some points. But also, even though Alabama feels like they have a ceiling of maybe 30 points this year against a good team, they also have, to me, a pretty high floor. Like, they're not going to score 9 points. Watch them score 9 points now. But they're not going to score 9 points against Tennessee, right? Like, I think that what you have is this boom or bust offense that's not great for consistency, not great for keeping pressure off for defense. But in between a lot of those busts is a 79-yard touchdown to Kobe Prentice, right? Like, Alabama's offense looked terrible to start the day. Defense gave 6 points away on 2 long, ugly drives from Arkansas, and then Alabama takes the lead, right? Like, with one play. That's going to happen against Tennessee as well. So we can talk around this all day, but let's see what the model says and then get into some predictions.
Yeah, and I'll say one more fun fact here as we get in the model. Pressure is the name of the game, and we're talking about top guys in sacks. The top 2 in the conference are Dallas Turner and James Pierce, first and second. But the fun thing is that Barron's 6th and Braswell is 7th, and it's 11.5 sacks from those 2 from Alabama and 11 from Tennessee. So when you talk about chaos being a factor, chaos is definitely a factor when you have two sets of guys that are that disruptive. Our model has it 22.9 to 21.7, basically 23 to 22 point game in Tennessee's favor. But it's also one of those situations where Alabama has more yardage than Tennessee, 4.96 yards per play, 6.4 yards per attempt, 4 yards per carry. That's not quite competent passing. We usually say 6.5 is the point at which things are just not working at all. Over 4 yards per carry is just base competent rushing. So it's just a minimally competent but minimally competent offense. Tennessee, a little worse, but the big key here is it's 4.89 yards per attempt and 4.48 yard per carry. And that's kind of dangerous because it's saying the passing offense is completely ineffective for Tennessee and that the run game is a little better than Alabama's, but not that much. And so I think a lot of what you're seeing is the fact that Alabama's had a couple games like the USF game that really still spooked the model. Even the Arkansas game, right? They only scored 24 points. No matter what yardage they have, they seem to just really struggle to score 27, 28. And I'm about at this point of saying, you see this with certain teams, Alabama needs to play games under 30 points. And if they do that, like Daniel was saying, they seem to have a high floor, but they really struggle to get over 28 almost no matter what they do. It just seems to be who they are. Tennessee's been able to score more points off and on. So the scoring model, they're floating around 22 for both. The yardage model being pretty similar, saying Tennessee will run it a bit better, saying Alabama's going to be not a good passing offense, but a little better. And you can almost, those numbers are so close, you can almost chalk it as saying that Alabama's going to get one deep touchdown pass and otherwise be just as bad throwing the football. So a close model game, again, pressure being the name of the game, defensive pass statistics being really dominant compared to these two passing offenses, and it leads it into a total slugfest as far as the model is concerned.
Yeah, and I'm ready to give a prediction on this one. I mentioned earlier, because I didn't know off the top of my head how many sacks Alabama's had this year. Alabama's second in the country in sacks, and Tennessee is fifth, which is a pretty important number. They do get after the quarterback. But what's interesting is if you filter out FCS competition, because Alabama hasn't played an FCS opponent, Tennessee drops to 22nd. 7 of their 24 sacks have come against really bad competition. So I still think that Tennessee is a great pressure defense. And I don't think Alabama's going to be able to shut Tennessee down entirely, because what Alabama struggles with, everybody says Alabama struggles with running quarterbacks. I think they struggle more with quarterbacks who can throw or passing quarterbacks who can run. So like KJ Jefferson willed a couple of touchdown drives in that game just by being able to run enough to break a couple of like 30-yarders, and that gave them what they needed to get points. And that's going to happen with Milton as well. He did that against A&M a couple of times where if it wasn't for him running the ball, and it's middle of the field, which is what Alabama likes to give up, if he wasn't running the ball on a couple of plays, then they're giving that ball back to Texas A&M. So I don't think Alabama shuts them down entirely. I don't think they cover. But Alabama, outside of, I think, one game this year, has scored 24 offensive points per game in every single game. Give me Alabama 24, Tennessee 17. Tell me what you got.
We have almost identical thinking here. I'm actually going to pick Alabama 27-17, and that's just because that's what I already had in my head. I'm going to stick with it. We said the over-under was 48, and I mentioned that it was about the same as where I was at. So I'm putting it at 44 points, and I have it 10 points. I think the spread is right. I think the over-under is right. There is a real chance Tennessee can win this game, but they're going to have to outplay Alabama a little more than you would expect. Alabama has been outplayed from a penalty and discipline standpoint in most games. So just saying that you've got to do more than them. They've been more talented than the teams they've played, and they generally should have won the games they've played by more than they have. their inability to be consistent is the reason why they look like they do statistically. So that's all wrapped up in everything here. My bigger concern is who's going to be able to do enough to keep the opposing team from pinning their ears back and blowing up drives on the regular. It's hard to say because the quality of competition, even to this point in the year, is still not consistent enough to really get a firm grasp of how good the rushing attacks are for both teams. Texas A&M is an interesting team last week because they've been run on pretty hard by teams in the past. And when they played Alabama, they played them very differently than they played Tennessee. They were much more aggressive at the line of scrimmage and much more willing to just try to either shut down or give up a big play. And it burned them. It caused them to lose the game. And they were a little more passive versus Tennessee, kind of waiting for Milton to make a mistake and at the same time giving up runs. As long as they weren't popping off big touchdown passes, they were okay with that. And that ended up being a better strategy for them defensively by a long shot. I lean towards saying that Alabama here is probably going to run the ball better than Tennessee. And I think Alabama's going to do the better job of being a run play action team where they're mostly sustaining drives on the ground and they hit one or two deep shots in this game, or at least one or two more deep shots than Tennessee does. And that gives them about a touchdown lead, maybe an extra touchdown over Tennessee. And that's, I think, where the smart play is from a Vegas sharp perspective, or what the expectation really is coming down to. I think Alabama's line, as I said, is actually underrated right now. The perspective, a lot of people think that they can't run the ball, which is really not true. It's had to do with a lot of the defenses they faced. And Tennessee's defense is good, but they don't have the front seven that Texas A&M does to kind of cause the same problems. So, yeah, you end up in the situation where, if Alabama can kind of keep on schedule, and they don't have to do it every drive, but like 3 or 4 drives, right? That'll give them the chance to win the game. And I certainly think this is one game, though, where if one team or the other is -2 in the turnover margin, that's enough to flip it to a Tennessee win or enough to flip it into an Alabama blowout either way.
And it's not for nothing, but back-to-back weeks, Tennessee and Alabama had a common opponent. And Tennessee couldn't throw on Texas A&M. Alabama could. And Texas A&M threw it pretty well, at least in the first half, against Tennessee. But I will say that it was impressive how Tennessee ran the ball in the first half too. So, all right, y'all, let us know in the comments what you think the score is going to be, and let us know if you think if either one of these quarterbacks has to throw to win the game for their team and the running games are shut down, who do you think is better poised to do that, Joe Milton or Jalen Milroe? Remember, like and subscribe, share us if you can. Check out collegefootballnerds.com, free to sign up and simulate all the games to your heart's content. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.